Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Canon RF 70-200mm F2.8L from their luxury series IS. It has an image stabilizer, and USM. It has dual nano USM focus motors to drive it. So this is the premium, telephoto option that covers the typical focal length and aperture value that has become standard for a lot of working professionals that will do everything from sideline sports in smaller venues to weddings and event photography to portrait photography, and of course general purpose. There's so many applications for this focal length and this maximum aperture. Now in this case, Canon has developed a new design that is a departure from their typical design that we have seen in at least 4 or 5 different lenses on the EF mount for their 70-200mm f2.8 that have followed a pretty standard blueprint along the way. In this case, we have a definite redesign as they have reimagined this lens and focal length for mirrorless, and so that comes with a number of positives, also a few negatives that come with it, and we'll highlight both of those as a part of today's review. Now today we're going to do the standard review, which means I'm going to hit the highlights, I'm going to give you my conclusions, but I won't go into all the details. And if you want those details, you want to see the process whereby I arrived at my conclusions, I recommend that you check out the definitive review, which is longer format but gives you all of that information. We'll start, however, by looking at the redesign that we have here. We have a lens that is about 30% lighter. It comes in at about 1,050 grams roughly compared to nearly 1,500 grams for the last EF L Mark III version of the lens. And so a significant weight savings. It's also about 30% shorter. And so it comes in at somewhere around 149 millimeters in length compared to around 200 millimeters for that lens I've referenced previously. So you have a lens that's about 30% lighter, it's about 30% smaller. It's also about 30% more expensive. And so, in Canon world, you get smaller and lighter and you pay considerably more. Less lens, more money, apparently. In this case, you've got a lens that, rather than being an internally zooming lens and thus having a fixed, longer, larger physical shell, you've got a lens that is actually externally zooming. And so it will extend a fair bit, as you can see. But when it's in its retracted form, it has a fairly dense, squat kind of look with a lot of the weight close to the camera. And that reminds me a lot of the 70-300. Also, you have a really nice build quality, and you have really great weather sealing throughout. Flooring coatings on the front and the back element, seals at various points, all near all of the switches, near all of the rings, making sure that everything is nicely sealed. And so this is a lens that, yes, while it does extend in length, I believe that the quality weather sealing should mean that you're not getting dust being pulled inside, and it's designed with that in mind. It also is designed with Canon's shock-proof design. That means that this, as a professional grade lens, it can take some bumps along the way while still keeping everything in its proper place, the elements properly centered. And this is a design that should hold up well for the long haul, which has been the case for a long time for Canon's L-series lenses. You end up with 3 rings. The closest ring, which is a different kind of position for the control ring that is a part of Canon's RF design. This can be programmed to a variety of functions in the camera body. Often it's at the front of the lens. In this case, it is close to the lens mount. So you're going to have to remember that. Next, you have a manual focus ring, and while you probably won't often manually focus this lens, it does a fairly good job, a little bit on the light side in terms of the resistance, but I find manual focus on Canon bodies to be pretty great. I mean, I love their focus guide, and of course, it helps a lot in just making that focus process more organic. But truth be told, you've got a great autofocus system here. You probably won't often be using that. The largest ring by far is the one closest to the front of the lens, and that, of course, is the zoom ring, which does extend nice and smoothly. No issues with that there. There is a focus lock that locks only at the 70mm position. You're probably going to want that. I've hiked a fair bit with this lens, and it definitely will start to extend if you don't engage the focus lock. You know, a little bit of rubbing, but also I think just a little bit of that zoom creep that happens through, you know, gravity pulling down on a heavier front of the lens as you walk along. 4 switches on the side of the lens. One is a focus limiter that you can employ in 2 different positions, either the full or eliminating close focus. So you can go from 2.5 meters to infinity. If you don't want to focus, you know you won't be focusing more closely. There's the AF/MF switch, which is handy to have. There is a stabilizer on and off, but then also below that there is a 3-position stabilizer mode. Now, on the note of that stabilizer, Canon rates the stabilizer at 5 stops. If you're using it on one of the new EOS R5 or R6 bodies, I've got the R5 here that I've done the review on, you actually get, according to Canon, 7.5 stops of assistance, which is huge. Now, I can't attest to shooting ridiculously low shutter speeds, handheld shutter speeds. I don't see a lot of practical value for that. What I can say, however, is that this shot was caught by my wife, not really paying attention to the settings, and so she grabbed the camera, she took the shot, not realizing it was in a church venue, and it was just at ISO 100. And so it ended up being a 1/10 of a second shutter speed, which typically would be a blurry mess. But thanks to the effective image stabilizer, we got a crisp looking shot. And so I think it's effective for that kind of thing. But above all, it's effective for video work, and so as you can see here, there's a radical difference between the stability of a handheld shot at 200 millimeters compared to when the stabilizer is turned off and all of a sudden things are shaking all over the place. And so I did find, you know, for example, I shot this 200 millimeter shot at 1/6 of a second. It's nice and steady. And so, I mean, good results, and certainly Canon has done a good job. It's a very mannerly IS system, no noise, no jumping in the viewfinder. It just does its job, and so kudos to them on that. Up front on the lens, it's a 90 millimeter diameter, 89 millimeters, and you have a 77 millimeter front filter thread, which has been true for basically almost all of these 70-200 f2.8 lenses. It does come with both a pouch, but then also a tripod collar. Tripod collar is easy to take on and off. It's really designed more around that. You'll see it's a little bit less of a robust design, you know, with a recognition that this is a lens likely to be used less often with it. So it's not quite as smooth for rotating once it's attached, but it's easy to take on and off. My only real criticism here is that the foot is not Arca-Swiss compatible, which means that you're going to have to use a quick release plate, and I have no idea why you would not make it Arca compatible. And so that is my kind of chief complaint when it comes to that. This lens, because it is smaller and lighter, is much easier to use without a tripod collar or foot, and so I suspect a lot of people end up using it more often like what I have, and that is just this with the bare lens. Now, the lens hood is a very nice lens hood in terms of its physical design. It's nicely made. It does have a locking mechanism, which has become kind of par for the course with Canon's, you know, higher end lenses. It also has this window, which really is designed around, if you're using a circular polarizer, to give you easy access to rotating that filter. I will point out a couple of things about the hood itself. Obviously, it's a large hood compared to the size of the lens. And my biggest criticism is it also flares out to be a very wide hood. And so what happens is when you reverse it for storage, it ends up occupying quite a large footprint because of how large that hood is for storage. And as a byproduct of that, because the lens is short enough that it fits in more lens, you know, bags for transporting, I've actually found that I end up leaving the hood home sometimes because of that. And so I actually would prefer that it fit more closely, and that way it doesn't, you know, dramatically increase the footprint of the lens in a camera bag. But a lot of good things. One strong negative here that I do want to point out. At the rear of the lens, you will find a glass element that at 70 millimeters is less than a centimeter in depth. What that means is there just is not physical room to mount a teleconverter of any kind. And so it means that this is a lens that you're going to have to use with only the bare lens. Now, that certainly is a liability considering how well Canon's EF 70-200 f2.8 lenses did with teleconverters. And a lot of people have invested in that, and then a teleconverter, because they only occasionally will stray into deeper telephoto range, and it allowed them to basically use one lens and leverage it a little bit further by using a teleconverter. That's certainly a loss here, and so I do want to highlight that because if you buy this lens, you need to buy it knowing it's only going to be using that bare lens. Now when it comes to the autofocus here, we have a dual nano USM design. I really like that because nano USM is smooth, it's quiet, but in this case it's very fast as well. And in fact, most of your actual focuses are going to be essentially instantaneous and without any kind of sound or drama associated with them. And of course for video, it's much more useful than your typical USM motor. Let's take a look at how focus pulls sound like. So you can see everything there is extremely quiet. There is that tiny faint little whirring or clicking, which mostly seems to happen after focus is achieved. And so it's almost more like the brakes being put on rather than, getting momentum going up, spooling up. And so overall, that's a beautiful performance for that. And I was very impressed with the ability for tracking action. And so as you can see in this sequence, a small dog moving fast towards the camera. She's dark around the eyes, and so it makes it harder to detect the eyes, and yet I had consistently excellent autofocus throughout all of the burst. This is a lens that really is able to take advantage of the advanced tracking and burst rates of the R5 and the R6, and so obviously very, very welcome on that front. Also did a good job with eye detect for either in an event setting or for shooting portraits, and so I got accurately focused results, that were focused on the eyes. And so I'm very, very positive about the autofocus in this. I think they've done a great job with that. Now finally, when it comes to the image quality, if you really want the details of the image quality breakdown, you probably should watch that section in the definitive review. But essentially, I'm going to give you the highlights here. What we have is a lens that, in my experience, testing it in great detail, it seems optimized for center performance, but really even more so a little off center, and what I often refer to as the mid-frame. This makes sense. That's kind of the area where a lot of portrait photography is going to be done for rule of thirds and your typical compositions. So I don't find the lens to be particularly sharp in the corners at most parts of the zoom range. It needs to be stopped down sometimes to f5.6, but sometimes as far as f8 at some focal lengths before it gets truly sharp all the way across the frame. And so what I see is a lens design that has been optimized for the typical places where people will compose at wide apertures, and then it accommodates by getting very sharp across the frame when it's stopped down to more typical landscape apertures or places where people are going if they want a lot to be in focus. This lens design makes sense to me. However, I have seen a lot of new lens designs in the last few years that are able to do a little bit better job than that are able to be equally or even more so sharp in the areas where this lens is sharp while also being sharp in the corners of the frame. A case in point is the much less expensive Tamron 70-280mm F2.8 that came out for Sony FE. And so, I did some direct comparisons, and I found that I was a little bit disappointed that the Canon didn't do better relative to a lens that is less than half as expensive. And so I wasn't necessarily blown away by sharpness of it. I think please don't misunderstand me, it's a sharp lens. It's capable of producing beautifully detailed images. However, it's not mind-blowingly sharp to me. I don't really feel like Canon has advanced the ball when it comes to resolution performance from this lens. So if you're buying this lens expecting it to be a lot sharper than the last 70-200L Mark II or L Mark III, I think you may be disappointed. However, where I do think this lens has improved relative to previous zooms like this is that I think that the overall rendering from the lens is really top-notch. The bokeh is very, very nice, and some lenses have the ability to not only have a nice defocused background, but to produce really pleasing artistic backgrounds with the colors that are a part of the defocus region. And I felt like that was the case here, that I was just in a number of these images, I just felt like, you know, out of camera, I had images that just really had a beautiful feel to them. And so I think that that may be, to me, the greatest optical strength of this particular lens. Aberrations are fairly well controlled. It does have a mild amount of vignette, a little bit of barrel distortion at 70 millimeters. There's a bit more vignette, about an extra stop or stop and a half at the 200 millimeter end, and some pincushion distortion there. Neither of those things are really problems in terms of correction. And so there's no optical flaw here that I can really point to, but for a lens that is so incredibly expensive, $2,700 US, here in Canada it's more like $3,500. So a lens that is that expensive creates a certain kind of optical performance expectation from me. And I felt, as far as my expectation going in, that this lens slightly underperformed relative to my expectation. And of course, again, your mileage may vary. It's a very, very good lens optically. It's just not blowing away any of the competition, even though it is more expensive than any of the competition. Now, at the end of the day, what makes this lens, I think, most attractive is that you're getting a good optical performance, but in such a wonderfully convenient package. And I think that that is the true advantage here. This is the kind of lens that, because of its, its form factor, it's far more likely that you're going to use this lens more often. Some people that own the larger 70 to 200 millimeter lenses, they reach for them only when they have to, essentially. When there's no other choice of a lighter, more convenient option. And I just feel like this lens is going to put you in that situation far less often. And so that's what makes it most attractive to me. It's kind of an indispensable lens because of how easy it is to use. Overall, the images look great on a global level. I'm just not necessarily blown away on a technical level, at a pixel level from them. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that turns me off about the lens in terms of the package and what it produces. The price, however, is another point. And I think that a lot of people who are non-professionals are going to look at a lens this expensive and just feel like it's simply out of their range. It's not an affordable option for them. And so while I think it's great for working professionals who will just write this off as a business expense, essentially, and they'll love it, I think that Canon still has a lot of room for, an F4 version, at about half the cost. And also I think there's room for some third-party development on the RF platform that will give us some, competitive options that are priced more reasonably. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you'll look in the description down below, there is a linkage to my full text review. Beyond that, there's also linkage to an image gallery if you want to look at photos with a little more detail. There's also buying links if you want to purchase one for yourself, and beyond that, there's linkage to follow me on social media, to become a patron, or to sign up for my newsletter. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.